Hi there. My name is Tyler Menezes. I'm the Executive Director of Code Day. And today I'm going to talk to you about a skill that your school probably hasn't told you about and may never tell you about. And it's one that you've probably never even thought of. But it's going to play an incredibly important role in your future career as a software developer and in the contributions that we're going to be making to open source. Any ideas what that skill is? It is learning to read code. So you've probably already heard a lot about how you write code. And you've read a lot about how the compiler works, maybe. And, if you were to see a simple example of some code, you could probably trace it through as if you were a compiler or an interpreter. You could figure out, okay, like x plus equals 1, that means that x was 0, but now it's 1, so on and so forth. Those really simple cases are probably something you can already do. But when we get into the real world, your first career, your first job, you might be working at a company that has a project that's existed for 10 plus years. And it might have thousands or tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands or even millions of lines of code that have been written that are all part of this project. And someone's going to ask you to make a change to that. Where do you get started? That's where learning how to read code and do it in a sort of a systematic way that doesn't require you to actually understand every single thing that's going on, but sort of helps you break down where the changes you're going to need to make will be made. That's where learning how to read code in that strategic way is going to be important, and that's what we're going to talk about now. Now, we're going to break this down into 3 separate skills that I think are all important for learning how to read code. The first one is reading lines of code. The second skill is reading files and methods. And the third skill is going to be reading, any guesses? It's going to be a code base. All right. Those are the 3 skills that we're going to be talking about. And in this first lesson, we're going to be talking just about how to read lines of code. So just individual pieces of code where it might be a little bit confusing. Now, we're going to get into some code examples that might be a little bit complex. They're probably going to be more complex than anything you've learned in school so far. And this is going to be a real representative example of what's going to happen once you start working on this project. It's going to be difficult to understand what's going on sometimes. That is totally normal and it's totally expected. And I want to just start out by saying explicitly, you can do this. And this applies to absolutely anyone. It is possible for you to learn how to read code that looks very, very complicated. And I'm going to prove it to you. The skills that are involved in reading lines of code are the same skills that you've already developed if you know how to speak any language. Whether it's your first language or a second language, if you can read English, you can probably read code as well, because the skills are very much the same. So let's look at some examples and see how this is going to apply to when we're looking at code. So here's an example. Here's a quote that I pulled. This is from dictionary.com word of the day, right? So you see this quote here. Talking heads on the left and right are fulminating about the labor shortage. Now, most people have probably not seen the definition of the word fulminating before. That's certainly not a word that I had heard before I looked up this, before I specifically went out and looked for words that I didn't know. But take a second to read this quote and see if you can come up with any examples for what the word fulminating might mean. So again, take a second, figure out what you predict the word fulminating might mean. All right, any guesses? I mean, like, that's really what we're doing here is we're guessing, right? We're looking at the context and we're trying to figure out what this word might mean just from context, right? Or maybe another thing we might do is maybe we've heard a word that sounds kind of like this, And so we know that this other word is kind of related to this one thing, and maybe this word is related to that too, right? I think in this case, fulminating is sort of like angry thinking. That's my interpretation. But I actually don't remember the definition. I know it's something along those lines, but we can figure it out from context, right? We do this every day. You probably are talking to people, at least once a week when they say a word that you don't know, but you can infer what it means from context.